that awesome or what? Give those guys another round, a real round. So it's my privilege to introduce our final keynote of the evening, All Roads Lead to LinkedIn. We truly have the rock stars of the talent industry with us tonight. I'm just going to announce their names and let them go so you get the most time with them. First, we have Gerald Chertavian, who's the founder, CEO of Europe. We have Tom Davidson, CEO of EverFi. And of course, if we have All Roads Lead to LinkedIn, we have to have the CEO of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner. So please give them a hand coming up.
Hello, hello. Thank you all for staying here so late to hear some words of wisdom from my friends here, and it's really great to see you all. First off, to just kick off, I'd love to start with you, Gerald. Tell us a little bit about, give us 1 minute on Europe. Tell us why you started it. Tell us about your reach and your work with Opportunity Youth. And in fact, maybe for this group, define for us what Opportunity Youth means to you.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. Pleasure to be with you. Good evening. So Opportunity Youth is a word that technically means between the ages of 16 and 24, out of school and out of work, and you don't have more than a high school degree. Now, interestingly, that's about 17% of all 16 to 24-year-olds in the United States of America, and for communities of color, it's about 23%. So effectively, that definition applies to almost 1 out of 4 young adults of color in the United States today. Opportunity Youth, they were formerly called disconnected youth, which we found pejorative because our young adults did nothing to disconnect. They happen to be born unconnected in many respects and just lack opportunity to get into the mainstream workforce. And that's what we founded Europe on the premise 17 years ago, that we could work with those wonderfully talented young men and women, and in 1 year, help them move from either low income or no income to a professional career in companies like EverFi and LinkedIn, and show that they could be the best source of talent that a company could get access to. So that was the premise 17 years ago and 17,000 students ago who have now gone through the program.
And tell us a little, we were talking a little earlier, not just the reach, but the amount of capital that you've deployed against this problem has been pretty extraordinary. Give the folks a little bit of background on that.
So we're now a $135 million organization. We happen to be the fastest growing youth-serving organization started in this century, and we've now consumed close to $1 billion of capital in one way, shape, or form over that 17 years.
It's amazing, amazing. So Jeff, you talked to your employees a few weeks ago, and you talked a lot about this concept of a fourth industrial revolution where, I don't know if it's right to say there are going to be winners and there are potentially going to be losers from this. That innovation is going to open some doors. It's going to make it more difficult for others. Can you talk a little bit about that? Talk about your philosophy around that, what you're doing at LinkedIn to deal with that.
Yeah, so it's not, first of all, thank you for having us. It's wonderful to be here and on stage with two guys I have a tremendous amount of respect for. With regard to the fourth industrial revolution, certainly not our words or narrative. World Economic Forum has been talking about this for some time now. At LinkedIn, over the last several years, we've recognized that there's going to be an increasing need for us to realize and operationalize our vision of creating economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce, in part, not only because of some of the themes that Gerald was just talking about, the opportunity divide, widening socioeconomic stratification, youth-based unemployment, which is on the rise, and this broadening and widening skills gap, but increasingly the acceleration of technology, innovation, and the increasing displacement of people from the workforce. This fourth industrial revolution is the next in a progression that really started at the turn of the last century with mechanization, the steam engine, and then mass production and the assembly line and factories. automation and the rise of electronics and basic computing. And the fourth will be robotization. And that's going to mean AI, the rise of AI, and the rise of drones and sensors and things that ultimately have the potential, of course, robots to displace our workforce and displace workers. And whereas this started years ago as a consistent theme in science fiction, predicting a dystopian future, in the last several years, there's certainly been greater recognition that this really could happen. And most recently, at Davos this year, for the World Economic Forum, this was kind of the talk of the town. Amongst heads of state, amongst CEOs, there's increasing recognition that this is no longer science fiction. It's no longer about the future. It's happening. And the WEF predicts that by the year 2020, 7 million gross jobs will be displaced, 2 million will be added, 5 million net displaced from the global workforce. There are other reports that take the time frame out to say 2025, and it's dramatically higher estimates in terms of folks that could be materially and dramatically impacted. You don't need to look any further than your favorite news source, and it seems like every other week now there's a different report of an Asian manufacturing company that's going to replace tens of thousands of people with robots, not in 5 years' time, but in the next year. There's talk now of major retailers, and those retailers who are still maintaining growth and scale, moving to drones, for example, or robots within their warehouses. And it's coming. So the question is, how are we going to prepare our workforce for the jobs that are and will be, and not just the jobs that once were? And at LinkedIn, it's become very central to our thinking, what we're trying to accomplish.
So you two have worked together for a while on these issues. How many years have you all partnered up on?
LinkedIn probably since we started in the Bay Area, so almost coming on 10 years ago. And what's interesting is Jeff and I are approaching similar challenges from different ends of a spectrum. We're thinking all the time about what are the skills we need to teach for tomorrow. Kind of as Wayne Gretzky says, where's the puck going in terms of skills? And how do you be demand driven if you're in education? Right? What are the needs of the market? How do we respond to those needs? We've worked with LinkedIn, placed hundreds of young people into LinkedIn, in part in EverFi as well, in part because the leadership says we actually aren't going to purely use credentials as a way to sort human beings. We're going to think about competency. We're not just going to look at pedigree to say, do you get a look in our company? We're going to look at professionalism. And for our young people who get to go to LinkedIn, I thought you'd be interested to see how they feel about getting an opportunity to work in such a great company. So let's take a look at the day we announce to our students where they get to go to their internship after they've been training for 6 months. This will give you a sense of what it feels like to work at LinkedIn. Let's take a look.
Let's one mic go a little bit. So, I have the pleasure of announcing a company whose website founded in 2003. And I know for a fact that every single individual in this room uses it. Whoa. I got some more information. This company has been incredibly successful, specifically in the business world. And their aim is to connect professionals to opportunities around the world. All right. So, while they do have a website, they also gain revenue through professional services, talent solutions, and marketing packages. So, without any further ado, going to LinkedIn from LCS, Vladimir Akimov.
Amazing.
So,
Awesome.
now, have you ever heard of millennials being entitled? That's the opposite of entitlement. That's someone who said, I didn't have opportunity in my life, and I now have an opportunity to go to one of the best companies out there, LinkedIn, and actually I want that job, I'll work hard for that job. That represents millions of Americans who could be your next best employee, and they're hidden from view. But not when you get leaders like Tom and Jeff who give people visibility to our world. So thank you for being a great leader there. Appreciate it.
And thank you for making that kind of talent available to us. You see that kind of response, and that's the energy that some of the year up graduates bring to us. And we have the privilege of working with some other amazing programs, Management Leaders for Tomorrow by way of example. And when you see that kind of passion and fire in the belly, when you see that kind of work ethic, what's not captured there is the growth mindset and the perseverance, the loyalty. These are qualities that you don't necessarily pick up from a degree. There are qualities, non-cognitive skills sometimes, that have a tendency to be completely overlooked when people are sifting through resumes or LinkedIn profiles. And yet, increasingly, we find that these are the kinds of people that make the biggest difference within our organization. And one of the things we're dedicated to right now is trying to figure out a way to scale that. And working with organizations like EverFi, working with organizations like Europe and MLT, and figuring out how as a platform we can do a better job of surfacing that kind of talent.
Jeff, if you go, so you've got a lot of people out here who are startup founders. They're running fantastic ed tech companies. And if you go back in time, if you think about someone who's starting an organization of 20 people or 15 people, what's your advice for them around these issues, around hiring, opportunity? I've found one of the biggest challenges at EverFi has been, there have been areas where we've done this really well. There have been areas where we haven't done it well. And how hard it is if you get behind on those issues in terms of hiring, diversity, others. What advice do you have for people that are starting a company now, they've got 20 or 30 employees, how should they be thinking about this?
Yeah, if you're starting a company today, you have the luxury of establishing processes without legacy. And one of the things we're wrestling with right now, which I know a number of companies in the Valley, not just companies in the Valley, financial institutions on a global basis, trying to take leadership roles with regard to relaxing some of these traditional requirements that you see on the resume or you see on a job description. Years of experience or the kind of school you went to. We used to pride ourselves on recruiting from an incredibly short list of universities. And a lot of companies in the Valley did the same thing. We would pride ourselves, oh, we only recruit from school A or school B or school C. And we're certainly not alone. We recently conducted a little bit of research leveraging LinkedIn profiles and looked at tech workers within the Valley, and only 5% of them came from non-traditional backgrounds. Only 5%. Gerald knows this all too well. So today we're in a position where we've got this huge infrastructure and this huge recruiting machine and hiring machine and practices, and a lot of this is baked into the DNA, and yet we're highly cognizant of unconscious biases. We're highly cognizant of the inertia in our system, and we're starting to question all of it. And we're revisiting first principles and revisiting assumptions. So if I was starting today, I'm baking in diversity, I'm baking in inclusion, I'm baking in belonging into these practices from day one. I'm starting to think about things like the Rooney Rule, and not necessarily checking boxes in terms of numbers, diversity numbers, but ensuring that we're looking at underrepresented minorities and people that you wouldn't necessarily have an opportunity to meet with and interview for key roles. We're focusing on the fact that around a table, we need decision makers that come from a diverse set of perspectives. Once again, not for the sake of it, not for the sake of talking about numbers, but because our decision makers need to be reflective of the people we serve, our members and our customers. And to the extent we're not aligned, we're not able to do that, we're going to be making suboptimal decisions. So these are some of the things I'd be thinking about from day one.
What's, particularly on the engineering front, you've done something around these REACH apprenticeships. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, would love to. This is a brand new program. We're incredibly excited about it. It's still very early days, so we got to make sure it's successful first. But this year we started an apprenticeship program at LinkedIn. We've got 29 people in our first cohort. And this is trying to get away from this idea that everyone on the engineering team, everyone we recruit, has to have come from a specific school and has a specific kind of degree. Yes, CS degrees from specific schools can lead to us finding incredible talent, but it's not the exclusionary domain of incredible talent. This is what we all need to bear in mind. Increasingly, I hear this mantra, skills, not degrees. It's not skills at the exclusion of degrees. It's just expanding our perspective to go beyond degrees. And so with this particular cohort, we're finding that people with very basic coding skills, but have, say, graduated from a coding boot camp. And last year in the United States, 91 boot camps, graduating 18,000 folks with this basic level of coding experience. We're looking for folks like that. We're looking for people with a growth mindset. We're looking for people with the dedication, with the work ethic, and we want to give them a shot. And what we're finding is these people are a lot like the people Gerald helps us to source, and they're just incredibly talented. They need a chance. Some of these people come from the most extraordinary backgrounds. One of our apprentices, who's with us right now, was living in a homeless shelter 6 months ago, and ended up building an app that facilitated the way the homeless find shelters. And there's just so much talent to be had if people are open to finding this talent in different places.
Gerald, you've actually said some pretty provocative, in a good way, stuff in the past about not focusing on the 4-year degree, but really targeting skills. And I think one of the things that's been extraordinary to me, you know, Jeff and I are peers. We're practically the same level. Just joking. No, but as we've looked at, as we've been lucky enough to have a number of year-up graduates come through and stay to this day at EverFi, what struck me has been the toughness and the grit of those young people. I mean, it's extraordinary. So how do you see that as somebody who is really our first line of opportunity as we're looking out in our hiring practice? How do you see that? How do you help us figure that out? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, imagine if you're hiring someone and you could actually understand what was the degree of difficulty to get to the starting point. For many folks, they travel miles to get to a point where they can even compete. But when we look at people in the static, it's actually very rarely we go back and say, how hard was it for them just to get in front of me? You'd have a very different view of human beings if we looked at degree of difficulty to just be on a place where you could compete. You could sit in front of your good self and advocate for getting a job. And I think, going back to your question, too, is we have to be careful of designing systems in our own likeness. At least in my case, I was fortunate to go to school and then go to work. And let's do a little audience participation. Raise your hand if you have a 4-year degree. Keep it up if you got that 4-year degree between the ages of 18 and 22. Just look around a bit. Just spin your head around. You're all pretty smart. Someone shout out to me about what percentage of hands do you think are still up? You can put your hands down now. What percentage do you think are still up? 85, 90, a good percentage. Now, if we ask those same two questions of any 100 Americans today, what percentage of hands would be up across America today? 40, 30. How about 8? 8 hands would be up. The average person in this country who goes to college, 50%, work full-time. Half of all the human beings who go to college in America work full-time. That's not low-income Americans, that's not middle income, that's all Americans. The average age of a Bachelor of Arts is 28.5, right? But if we design systems the way I happen to consume it, of you went to college at 18, you graduated at 22, that is 8 out of 100 adults in the United States of America. We as leaders and people who have externalities associated with choices we make have got to be more broad in saying what system encourages us to see a broader array of talented human beings. And I think the thing I think about is where am I replicating what I happen to have experienced as opposed to trying to be more cognizant of what's going on in the broad sway of the people in this country.
Right on. So Jeff, as you've spent a lot of time now, one of the advantages that you have is you get to see this play out across millions and millions of data points across an economic graph. What are the things that LinkedIn if you look out 3 or 4 years, what's LinkedIn gonna inform us about in terms of how we think about hiring, the jobs that are coming down the road? I mean, you have such a unique perch around all this. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so taking a step back, Tom was just referring to the economic graph, which is one of the main ways in which we want to operationalize and manifest our vision of creating an economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. So the graph component of that is kind of a fancy way of talking about digitally mapping connections. Facebook is a social graph. It digitally maps relationships, familial relationships between friends and family. Twitter's an interest graph. LinkedIn was founded as a professional graph and has created a lot of value by virtue of mapping relationships between professionals. The economic graph is our vision to digitally map the global economy across 6 dimensions or 6 pillars. So the first is the workforce, and ultimately we want there to be a profile on LinkedIn for every member of the global workforce. There's over 3 billion people in the global workforce. We recently announced we had signed up our 500 millionth member, so obviously we have a ways to go. That's in part why it's a vision, but we're dedicated to seeing that through and trying to accomplish that. Second, we want there to be a digital presence or profile for every company in the world. And when you include small, medium-sized businesses, there's north of roughly 60 million companies in the world. We want there to be a digital representation for every job available at any given time, every open job. And by some estimates, there's as many as 20 million jobs that can be digitally represented. And we're making great inroads along those lines. We want there to be a digital representation for every skill required to obtain the jobs offered by those companies. And with the acquisition of Lynda, we can now offer coursework. And we're very excited to be rolling out Lynda or LinkedIn Learning as a platform that's going to enable organizations to essentially distribute their content, their learning content through our platform to their employees or beyond if they're interested in doing so. So we're going to broaden the amount of coursework that's running through our ecosystem. We'd also like there to be a digital presence or profile for every university, higher educational organization, or vocational training facility that enables people to acquire the skills and acquire the knowledge they need to obtain those jobs. And then lastly, the last pillar is for LinkedIn to continue to evolve as a publishing platform that allows for every individual, every company, and every university in the world to share their professionally relevant knowledge if they're interested in doing so. And once this infrastructure is in place, we want to allow capital, all forms of capital, intellectual capital, working capital, and human capital to flow to where it can best be leveraged. And in doing so, we want to help lift and transform the global economy. So it's not even about looking out, Tom, 3-5 years. We're actually seeing increasing use cases for it today, which is really exciting. So for any locality, anywhere in the world, you can pick any town, city, you can pick any country, and we can work with local government officials and are doing so all over the world at this point in various places. And we can identify the fastest growing jobs within that locality, the skills required to obtain those jobs. We can evaluate the skills of the aggregate workforce within that locality. We can size the gap, the skills gap between the jobs that are fastest growing and the skills that that workforce currently has. And then ultimately, we can make that data accessible either through APIs or other forms of distribution so that vocational training facilities, junior colleges, and even 4-year university programs can actually adjust their curriculum. So you can imagine a just-in-time curriculum, which is going to be far better able to prepare people for new technologies and new job creation. So that's something we're really excited about.
So you talked about the Lynda acquisition, so let's hit on that for a second. That went off like a bomb, you know, in the ed tech market in a good way, and was going to unleash hundreds of major acquisitions right on the heels of that. Talk to us a little bit. So you've had some news this year. Talk to us a little bit how life is different post Microsoft acquisition. How has your world changed? And talk to us a little bit about that.
So by design, it hasn't really changed. The day-to-day is very much the same. So we continue to operate as an independent company, and that was very much by design and something Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, and I discussed prior to announcing the acquisition and closing the acquisition. And he wanted to do this differently. And his priority in terms of value creation for Microsoft is for LinkedIn to continue to grow and accelerate the realization of our mission, our vision our objectives and targets. And so we can do that both as an independent entity. We're really excited about our roadmap, but we can certainly accelerate that by virtue of leveraging Microsoft's footprint of over 1 billion individual users of their software, by leveraging this incredible technical infrastructure that they've been building out over the last several decades. You think about conversational computing and AI, you think about augmented reality and virtual reality. There's so much that we can be doing there, so that's really exciting. They have extraordinary talent that is working extremely well with our own talent. So there's a lot of room for us to really accelerate what it is that we've set out to accomplish. And so far, so good. We had very high expectations for how this would work, and thus far, they're certainly meeting or exceeding those expectations.
So you and I, just to stay with you for a second on this, you and I have talked a lot about company cultures over time and how compassion and empathy really drive the entirety of your focus on how you manage and how you deal with your people. Gerald, it's obviously in the DNA of everything you do. Jeff, can you talk? I've always found it to be a really interesting ethos that you have and focus that you have. Can you just talk a little bit about what that means to manage compassionately, and then let's talk a little bit about some things that we've talked about in terms of bringing it into that
stuff that we're very excited to announce tonight for the first time. So if you asked me, in terms of management style, both for myself and something we really try to ensure is cascaded throughout LinkedIn and all of our managers, first principle is managing compassionately. And it's important to draw a distinction between compassion and empathy. Oftentimes in Western society, we have a tendency to use empathy and compassion synonymously, and there's very important differences between the two. Empathy is feeling what another living thing feels. Compassion is putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else, seeing the world through their lens or perspective for the sake of classically defined alleviating their suffering. And within a work environment, it doesn't necessarily have to be as dramatic as alleviating suffering. It can also be just helping somebody or achieving an objective. And managing compassionately, we find to be incredibly valuable in terms of forging connections and building the right kind of trust, the right kind of shorthand, the right kind of camaraderie, and the right kind of teamwork and collaboration. And it essentially comes from an understanding that when you experience any kind of conflict within an organization, and we all experience conflict all the time, no matter how wonderful everyone thinks they are and how wonderful their organizations are, there's conflict. There's conflict multiple times on a daily basis. And more often than not, when we experience conflict, take at work, for example, we more often than not knee-jerk to assuming ill intention by the other person, that they're being political, or they're out to get us, or they must be ignorant, or how in the world could they possibly disagree with what you believe to be the right answer. And as a result of that, if that person gets defensive or angry, the individual on the receiving end of that can get defensive and angry, and then it escalates. And before long, you've got very little chance of resolving whatever conflict exists amicably, let alone actually collaborating and getting to a better answer. And so managing compassionately is starting with being a spectator to your own thoughts, especially when you become emotional in a situation like that, and being cognizant and mindful of the fact that you may become emotional, you're getting angry, you're getting irritated, you're getting frustrated, understanding why that is, and then taking the time to understand why the other person is in that state. And maybe it's got nothing to do with ill intention. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe you've said something that triggered them, and they're having flashbacks to something that happened long before they even first met you. Maybe you're talking about something that they're ill-equipped to be discussing in front of a group, and they're feeling a bit insecure or vulnerable. There's a whole host of reasons they could be responding the way that they are. And by virtue of taking the time to understand where the other person is coming from, you can forge a much stronger connection in that moment, and you can resolve conflict much faster. And it's just a lot more constructive and a lot more valuable in terms of the way teams work together, in terms of the way you manage, in terms of the way you do career pathing, in terms of the way you coach. And rather than make the same mistake that I certainly made when I was younger, that a lot of younger, less experienced managers make, and just assume everyone should be doing things the way you're doing them, which is, trust me, not the best way to get the most out of another person on your team. You just take the time to understand where they're coming from, what they're trying to accomplish, and do your best to help them make that possible.
And then how do you reinforce that down, into the organization? What's the muscle memory that you are attempting to build with your leaders and folks around your management team?
Yeah, so it comes back to something, Tom, that you cited earlier, which is the importance of culture and values. And we delineate between culture and values. We've got 5 cultural dimensions, 6 values. One of our values is that relationships matter. It's essentially a proxy for managing compassionately. So it's something we recruit against, it's something we onboard against, it's something we develop against, and it's something we evaluate performance against. And one of the things I've learned over the last decade or so, where I've been really focused on this, and by the way, I like to talk about aspiring to manage compassionately, because it's very, very difficult to be compassionate in all situations at all times. So you have to cut yourself a little bit of slack. But one of the things I've learned is that we shouldn't wait for people to be in the workforce to be teaching them the importance of compassion and managing compassionately. And that as young as primary school, I think it would be enormously valuable to teach kids what compassion is and the importance of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so one of the things that we're really excited about to talk about tonight is the fact that I'm going to be working with EverFi, and we're going to be rolling out a curriculum for primary schools to begin to teach compassion, hopefully in the 28,000 schools that EverFi reaches. So you want to talk a little bit about what compelled you to get involved?
Yeah, it's this is something that has been just enormously exciting. We probably connected, 2 years ago at this point, and it was something, EverFi focuses on these areas that are outside of the core that we feel should be very much a part of the school day, embedded in the school day. So these are areas like healthy relationships, curriculum that goes after bullying, alcohol responsibility, sexual assault prevention, financial literacy, student loan preparation. So these are often areas that have a huge impact on student success. No one ever spends as much time as they ever should on them. And so we've built this very large school network across the country of millions and millions of students who go through these platforms on a daily basis. And so the first time I ever sat down with Jeff, he brought this up as something that was very important to him. And we had built 2,000 college campuses to spend a lot of time focusing on college sexual violence and healthy relationships. We had built a really interesting course with the NFL around healthy relationships and embedding that into the school day in high school. But it was very clear that this was something, particularly with what we're seeing so much in society today, that needed to be a part of the school day, particularly in primary school, where we all have kids who are very young, and I have 4 little kids, and Jeff has 2. And so we started to kick around some ideas, and I think Jeff had it on a little longer time continuum than I had.
Tom is very action-oriented, for those of you in the audience that don't know him personally.
So Jeff said, yeah, we should do this. And so I think I called you the next day and said, by the way, we're going to do this. So we are knee-deep. My partner, Zach Wagner, and Tom Parisi, who runs our school network, and others are here. And we're building out what's going to be the definitive, fascinating course to teach kids the true definition of compassion, to put them in very interesting simulations around how they can employ compassion in their lives, with their fellow students, with their teachers, with their families. There's nothing like it that exists out in the education space today. And Jeff has made a very big commitment to get behind this personally, to convene not just Silicon Valley, but a lot of folks who have really wanted to see this as a part of the school day in every school in America. And we've made a commitment to begin to roll it out late this fall, so that every single school in the country will have a compassion curriculum, and we're going to work very hard to make that happen. So I think it's something that's incredibly important to the country, and particularly right now, and something we're really, really proud to be teaming up on. So, yeah.
Very exciting.
Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, it's, I think you said it very well, and I was only half kidding. I mean, about Tom being action-oriented, when I first sat down with him, we were talking about education, and one of the reasons we had been introduced is EverFi is doing some amazing stuff in very unorthodox ways that's attracted a lot of attention, and he recently announced a major financing that I know we're all very excited about for EverFi. And I've been interested and excited about education reform for as long as I can remember. It was actually one of the reasons I got involved in business, which may sound counterintuitive, but at a fairly young age, I wanted to make a difference in terms of education, and decided when I was going to college, I could either pursue a route where I was teaching or administrating or legislating, or I got into business and could amass enough influence and resources, hopefully, to make a difference. And fast forward a couple of decades, and Tom and I are sitting down talking about education reform, and I was really struck by the model for EverFi, and we got into a discussion about compassion specifically, and the need to teach compassion, and the fact that there's so much focus on truly cognitive skills. You know, you think about the amount of energy and resources that go into math, that go into reading, that go into writing, and if you think about it, what's more important than teaching compassion? And so I never thought this was something that was going to happen in the immediate future, let alone the foreseeable future. It was kind of a vision to ensure. How many of you are familiar with code.org? Show of hands. So a lot of folks in the audience. So I thought, how cool would it be to essentially do the same for compassion and teaching compassion in schools? And so I threw that out to Tom, not thinking anything of it, and he literally called the next day and said, let's go. And I was like, what do you mean, let's go? Let's go where? He's like, let's go make this happen. And so sure enough, it's going to happen.
Well, I think one of the things that's exciting about what Jeff's wanted to do is we've been really intentional at EverFi about going to places really where technology is usually we always say it's very much the short end of the stick. So these are areas in the Alabama Black Belt, Mississippi Delta, lots of Native American reservations across the country. And so I think one of the key things that Jeff's made a commitment to do is make sure that these programs arrive there and not just in the districts that can afford it. And so one of the things that we've done is we've chosen about 10,000 of these schools that are in very, very much off the beaten path of the usual ed tech cycles and access, and going to be bringing the compassion curriculum there first. So it's a big focus, and it'll be many millions of kids in the first year that'll go through the program. So it's super exciting. So
Very much so.
So Gerald, if you think about that as a segue into these, in the few minutes that we have left here, these non-cognitive skills, I would imagine that you have a very interesting balance that you have to hold up in terms of these softer, what you'd be labeled softer skills that you want to make sure your students, your future employees have, and these hard skills that they're often required. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we talk a lot about the ABCs, so attitudinal, behavioral, and communication skills being what we focus on primarily. And most people out there, when you hire for skills and fire for behavior, right? I mean, for the majority of folks who are not working well in teams, and James Heckman, who did the seminal research around focusing on early childhood, he got up on stage in front of several thousand people and said, I used to think it was actually bad investment to invest in an 18, 20-year-old who hasn't kind of made it. And he said, I now realize that you can learn these non-cognitives very quickly. You can model this behavior very quickly. You can actually get into the workforce and do the things employers want. Employers will tell you all day long, find me someone who shows up, is willing to work, is reliable, is a good team player. I will teach them the rest. And I think that shift, especially at that first, second job category, $30,000 to $50,000 a year jobs, non-cognitives are what employers really are looking for. And the question is how we're training them. I'd argue compassion may not just be for primary school. I know a lot of adults who could use compassion training as well. And I think allowing us to value more than just what's on a resume or just what's in hard skills. In fact, we just are launching through the Ad Council. What we're trying to do is bring this message that young people are much more capable than we may see to many more folks. So 3 years ago, we launched what has now been an $80 million ad campaign through the Ad Council to get employers to see young people actually for who they are, to appreciate that they have a short window of time to get across their competencies. In fact, the average interviewer looks at a resume for 7 seconds. The average recruiter looks at a resume for 7 seconds. So we have some new ads that'll be going out all across the country, probably another $40, $50 million worth of ads to get employers to see people differently. Let's take a look at this.
Yeah. Is this the 7 second?
Yeah, take a look at this.
I worked 12-hour shifts at the recycling company with my dad, who's 72. That taught me a work ethic that I carry with me every day.
When you're running your own business and taking care of your disabled brother, you tend to learn about responsibility pretty quickly.
I was living in a shelter, juggling 3 jobs. I had to be resilient. That's something that you can't teach.
Growing up where I did, a lot of things could have gotten in the way of my goals. But I learned to push through. And that's what I bring to work every day.
My parents weren't fluent in English. So in school, I had to be independent and take initiative. And that's how I handle every project I get.
You know, it's worth mentioning, there's a lot of talk about the obvious importance of diversity, inclusion, belonging, social impact, and it's wonderful to see the extent to which this is becoming part of the dialogue, but this is also about good business. Right. So the folks that are coming out of programs like Year Up are going to create a lot of value. And so I think this ad campaign is brilliant because it raises awareness to a talent base that a lot of folks are just not getting exposed to by virtue of some of the inertia and some of those legacy dynamics that we were talking about earlier. So we're all very grateful to Gerald and his vision for having started this 17 years ago. And it's really starting to reach critical mass now, and it's wonderful to see.
And how do you, you and I have talked a lot in the past about how you scale this. So talk to me about the next few years and the things you're going to do to throw some kerosene on this.
As many entrepreneurs, I think, think about how do you scale, how do you have impact. The challenge we're looking at is measured in 6 million opportunity youth across this country. We've served 17,000, right? So if you think about how small we are. So a lot of our effort today, in fact, that whole Grads of Life platform generated 1 million people coming to that website, tens of thousands of businesses downloading tools, which we gave and started to create to say, if you want to work with this population, here's how you do it. And we had hundreds and hundreds of businesses call us and say, we think these young people actually are talented. And so we're now working with Apple's design firm to take apart what we do programmatically, put a little more technology around it, and figure out how to actually get it into many, many more environments, largely through the community college system, which is 12 million Americans, the largest post-secondary system in the country. I would argue underutilized in some respects. And how do we get that into millions? Some of the tenets and principles of things we know how to do that have already helped a lot of people lift themselves out of poverty and into livable wage jobs in this country. So the goal is what's 10x to 100x, which is one of the reasons why working with certainly you and Jeff, you think in those numbers, you work in those numbers, you think about platforms, principles, tools. And so we're trying to shift our gaze and our focus and our altitude to say if it doesn't get you to 10 to 100x, we shouldn't be pursuing it with a lot of our capital investments and our innovation investments.
That's great.
So hopefully we'll get there, but you guys are going to teach me how to do it, hopefully.
Well, part of the key is getting the flywheel spinning, right? So one of the things that we're really interested in from LinkedIn's perspective is shining a light on these kinds of candidates, these kinds of programs, including facets within our search capability that's going to help hiring managers, it's going to help recruiters find these young adults. And the key is not just finding them, obviously that's the start of the process in the funnel, but what's really important is that once, say, a Year Up graduate comes into a company, that they're successful. And with success, the hiring manager and the recruiter says, where do I get more people like that? Right. And that's when you start to get the flywheel spinning, where people stop the legacy practices, and they stop exclusively recruiting from very specific situations in universities and with very specific, narrow definitions of experience and skills, and start broadening that aperture. And when that begins to happen, then you get wholesale change at scale.
Well, it's kind of fascinating when you think about when we started thinking about doing this together, the pieces that really come together of Opportunity Youth, how networks can drive opportunity and access for people in a way they never have had before, the way to manage that compassionately, give people opportunities, and certainly get your teams to get behind this. It's a really fascinating ecosystem, and I'm proud of, certainly proud of what you all are doing. It's a huge contribution to the country. And thank you all for staying so late tonight. It's great. Thanks so much.
Give one more round, please. The program starts tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. We'll see you all then. You get back from the tabernacle. By then. Thanks.